Viktor Frankl described three pathways through which human beings find meaning in life. The first is the pathway of creative values, what you contribute to the world through your work, your art, your actions. A surgeon who saves lives, a teacher who illuminates minds, a carpenter who builds something lasting. All of these are engaged in meaning through what they give. The second pathway is experiential values, what you receive from the world through genuine encounter, the experience of beauty, the pursuit of truth, and above all the love of another person. These two pathways are familiar. They correspond roughly to what most people mean when they imagine a meaningful life. But Frankl insisted on a third pathway, one that he considered unique to his own thinking and that emerged most powerfully from his years in the Nazi concentration camps. He called it attitudinal values, the meaning that becomes available when we choose how to face suffering that cannot be avoided. The key word is unavoidable. Frankl was not a masochist or a glorifier of pain. He believed that needless suffering should be prevented and that suffering which can be removed should be removed. The attitudinal pathway does not apply to suffering that has a remedy. It applies to the category of human experience that simply cannot be escaped: the terminal diagnosis, the irreversible loss, the disability that will not heal, the death of someone beloved. These are situations in which asking "how do I get out of this" has no answer, and the question that remains is "how do I carry this, and what does the way I carry it reveal about who I am and what I value?" Frankl believed that even in those situations, perhaps especially in those situations, the human being retains the capacity to find meaning. Not the meaning of the suffering itself, which is often opaque and resistant to interpretation, but the meaning in how the suffering is born. A person who faces a terminal illness with dignity, honesty, and continued care for those around them is not simply enduring. They are doing something that requires courage, something that demonstrates the depth of their character, something that can be witnessed and learned from by everyone who observes it. He witnessed this in the camps. Among the prisoners, there were those who surrendered entirely, who became, as Frankl described it, hollow and resigned, going through the motions of survival without any inner orientation remaining. And there were those who maintained something, a kindness extended to another prisoner, a prayer offered in near total darkness, a joke told in the face of absurdity, an act of sharing from an already inadequate ration. These acts did not improve the external situation. The camp remained what it was. But they preserved something in the person who performed them, a sense of being more than what the situation had reduced them to, a dignity that the guards had not managed to extinguish. Frankl was careful to avoid romanticizing this. He did not claim that everyone in the camps found meaning, or that those who didn't were morally inferior. The conditions were designed to destroy the human person, and they succeeded in many cases. What he observed was a possibility, a capacity for attitudinal meaning that some people exercised and others could not, and he drew from it the conclusion that the human spirit contains resources that circumstance alone cannot fully account for. In ordinary life, the applications are less dramatic but no less real. The person who receives a diagnosis of chronic illness must eventually negotiate with a new kind of life, one in which creative and experimental values remain available but are reorganized around a reality that includes ongoing limitation and pain. The question of attitudinal value becomes, who will I be in this? Will I become smaller, more bitter, more contracted? Or will I find in the limitation an invitation to a depth of patience, compassion, or courage that the easier life did not require? Frankl did not promise that this is easy. The attitudinal pathway is the most demanding of the three because it operates in the territory where the self is most exposed, where there is no achievement to point to, no beauty to enjoy, nothing to distract from the bare fact of suffering. It requires what Frankl called the defiant power of the human spirit, the capacity to say, in effect, I am more than this situation, and I will demonstrate that not by escaping it but by how I meet it. In the end, attitudinal values represent Frankl's most radical claim, that meaning is available to every human being in every circumstance, including the worst. The last thing that can be taken from a person is the freedom to choose their attitude. And in that freedom, however constrained, the human spirit remains alive. Subscribe to the Psychology of Viktor Frankl to explore more of his timeless ideas.